welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us this evening for our event, Ensuring Accountability, Promoting Integrity, and Uncovering Truth. We're very happy you're here. I'm just going to go through a few housekeeping items before I turn the floor over to Sam Fulwood III, the Dean of the AU School of Communication, and Charles Lewis, founder and executive editor of the Investigative Reporting Workshop. This event is being recorded. You've probably gotten a prompt to acknowledge the recording. I ask you to mute your microphone unless you're asking a question, but this is a small group and there will be time to ask questions in the latter part of the program. You could use your raise hand function, which is along the bottom, or you're welcome to type a question in the chat box at any time. And now it's my pleasure to introduce the new Dean of the School of Communication, Sam Fulwood III, who began his tenure with AU just last month. Dean Fulwood is a prominent journalist, public policy analyst, and author. He comes to AU School of Communication from the Center for American Progress, where he served as Senior Fellow and Vice President of Race and Equity. There, his work addressed issues including media influences on American life, race relations, data-driven journalism, and the intersection of media, technology, and democracy. He's the former director and founder of American Progress's Leadership Institute, a program to assist with the advancement of people of color in public policy. He's been a fellow at the Center for Congressional and Presidential Studies at AU's School of Public Affairs. And for 3 decades, his journalism career spanned a Metro columnist at the Plain Dealer in Cleveland, Ohio, an assistant city editor, business reporter, editorial writer, and South Africa bureau correspondent for the Baltimore Sun, and national correspondent with the Washington Bureau of the Los Angeles Times, where he created a national race relations beat and contributed to the paper's Pulitzer Prize-winning coverage of the LA riots in 1992. Dean Sam Fulwood, welcome.
Thank you, Pam. I am delighted to be here. This is such an august group of people that we have to talk this evening. And I'm also especially happy because this is my first public-facing event as dean. So it's you all get me fresh off the boat, so to speak. And I'm very excited about our conversation today, which is so important. We have, as I said, an illustrious group of people in our audience. I'm not going to go through and name everybody, but I do want to acknowledge that we have members of AU's Board of Trustees with us. We have representatives from the Institute for Investigative Reporting's Advisory Board members. We have esteemed alumni. We have friends. I even have some old ex-colleagues, I think, from the LA Times with us today. So we'll hear a chance to hear from you in a little bit. But right now, I want to take a moment to acknowledge and thank additional SOC colleagues for joining this conversation tonight. Lynn Perry, managing editor at the Investigative Reporting Workshop and journalist in residence at SOC, is with us. Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist John Sullivan, who's a senior editor at IRW and an investigative reporter at the Washington Post. And Amy Eisman, director of our journalism division within the School of Communication. Thank you all for being with us tonight. I'm happy to have this time to speak with you, Chuck. We've sort of crossed paths indirectly over our careers, but this is the first time we get a chance to work together. Our roots extend back into the old days of newsrooms. You were an investigative reporter at ABC's Nightline and at CBS News. Were a producer at 60 Minutes, earning 2 Emmy nominations. And in 1989, you walked away from all of that, in part because you were concerned about the censorship that you saw. And you founded a newsroom with a nonprofit model, which we're going to sort of delve into talking a little bit about that nonprofit model. And you've been called sort of the godfather of nonprofit investigative journalism. Along the way, you've earned a MacArthur Fellowship, which most people know of as a Genius Award. That makes you a genius for your reporting and for building the capacity of investigative journalists. And I guess I'm pretty proud to say you are, as we sit here now, waiting to find out whether you will get the Nobel Peace Prize for your investigative work. So that's quite a lifetime of accomplishment, and I'm delighted that it's in the school that I get to work with. So that's really impressive. I want you to tell us, if you can, why did you see the need for a different way of doing investigative journalism?
Well, I was, journalists can sometimes be a pain in the neck, as we all know. And so everywhere I worked in the media, I worked at the Wilmington News Journal doing sports, and some of the editors pulled punches and did things with the writing that was inappropriate in my view. Anyway, and it got like that with everything. 60 Minutes, Mike Wallace's producer, there were situations there that were inappropriate, frankly. And I ultimately quit and broke a contract and left 60 Minutes after I had already been at ABC News before that. It's not that I go around looking for trouble. It's just that I get really irritated when I see people doing things that are inappropriate or lying or just things that I don't like or don't think shouldn't have happened. And so not to sound overly righteous, I just occasionally things get in my craw and and I change course, so to speak. I mean, I'm glad that I'm glad I worked at ABC News and 60 Minutes. It was a great experience to see both of those worlds, World News Tonight and all the brass there, and all the New York brass, Roone Arledge, all those kinds of folks. And it, anyway, everything I've been involved in with these types of operations have been really interesting. But I've really entered into the world of nonprofit journalism, and started the Center for Public Integrity and the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, which each won Pulitzer Prizes in a few years. And that was one where we didn't have to ask anybody else what they thought, or what, we could direct it ourselves. We would explore and reveal we would reveal our sources of funding to make sure the public knew about it. I was a Boy Scout, basically. So I was into transparency, and I felt it was actually essential that we do that. We were threatened. Yeah, go ahead.
What kind of compelled you to be in that kind of a watchdog role?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know. It could be a childhood thing. When I was in third grade, I had a teacher who got ticked off at me because I talked to people in the back of the room, and so she started pulling my hair, which really made me angry. I was only in third grade, so I went home, told my mother, this lady has been trying to pull my hair as a way of disciplining me. And she said, well, we'll fix her wagon. And so she gave me a crew cut. And then the teacher got really ticked off and couldn't grab the hair. It was so close to the scalp. Anyway, so I've always had these funny, almost a movie. I mean, goofy things that I'm sure everyone has had some of these things. It's just, but it was sort of hilarious. I mean, and you got to have a sense of humor in this world, is the way I look at it.
So the idea of stepping away, shall we say, from corporate journalism or the more traditional forms of journalism to a nonprofit model. First off, can you define what is a nonprofit model for journalism, and why did you choose that mode to go into?
Well, working at the two networks, there were talented journalists there. I'm not going to say there weren't correspondents. I knew a lot of them, really great people, in fact, in a number of cases. But I just sort of got sour to, first of all, television has its own issues in general. You film something for 500 minutes, you do 13 minutes on 60 Minutes that leads the show. But you also have screenings that go on for 1 or 2 months, and you have people like Mike Wallace and Don Hewitt screaming because they don't like this, or they want their friend taken out of the script, which is why I quit 60 and left eventually. So all those things were interesting to me. I'm proud to have been at those places, but there was also a been there, done that element where I had done it, and been some Emmy nominations and stuff like that. But I also just didn't want to, frankly, be around some of these people. Some of them were dysfunctional. They would scream at you. They would take things out of scripts that was inappropriate because they were protecting someone who had fly. The founder of 60 Minutes, Don Hewitt, wanted to get to the Hamptons, and he had a really good friend who would give him a helicopter ride. And then when I investigated, and not because I was trying to get the guy, we were doing an investigation. It was happened to be about this company that this fellow worked at, and they wanted to take it out of the script, and I didn't. And
So as a nonprofit, you're able to do that, to do whatever it is you think is right without having,
Right.
but you become the boss then, don't you? You
No, I
then
think
become that.
Lynn Perry is the boss. She's the managing right? But no, I mean, I'm in. Yes, I'm the executive editor and the founder of the workshop. But literally, Lynn is in the trench every day. And all of our staff, John, and we have a group of editors, and we've all been around. I mean, I think the 4 editors at the workshop, we're good for about 100 years of journalism experience. So none of us are just starting out, in baby steps here. We've been around, so that helps, I think.
The IRW partners with many other news organizations, large and small. Notably, the workshop has partnered with Frontline, has a longstanding relationship with Frontline, and with the Washington Post. What are some of the highlights of those partnerships?
Well, those documentaries, those 15 documentaries, have been spectacular, and that they have won awards, Emmy awards, and I think we've been delighted to have them with us, and we've had our grad students getting to work with them during the production stuff, both in DC and up at Frontline WGBH in Massachusetts. It's been great for the students. It's been great for everyone. The one problem we have now is, which you may be aware of, is that Frontline, the Washington office of it, they've lost some money. The Corporation for Public Broadcasting lost 1/3 of its money, and that has diminished the Frontline work that we can do in DC. Hopefully that'll change. But we did 15 documentaries that were co-produced by us, was something that we're all proud of, I think, at the workshop. And somehow or other, we'll find another way to keep doing that work.
What about at the Washington Post?
Well, I know a lot of the folks at the Post. I was friends with Ben Bradley, and I interviewed a number of the folks there. John Sullivan, one of our editors, is at the Post and has done magnificent work. I have never really worked for the Post. I've done stuff for Outlook and articles for them over the years, but and I respect the Post. I mean, to me, the Post and the Times are the 2 best daily papers in the country, and I get them every day and try to read as much of them as I can. And so I respect them a lot. They're our 2 best news organizations, I think. I know the Wall Street Journal would be upset at that. I didn't mention them, but they're probably considered the 3rd best, probably. I mean, I think that's probably true.
We have a relationship, or IRW has a relationship with the Washington Post. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, there's a great story there. One day I was driving to AU from Alexandria, Virginia, where I live, and I get a phone call from the Metro editor. And he knew me and I knew him, and he said, "Hey, Chuck, I hear you're trying to hire John Sullivan." And I said, "I hear you're trying to hire John Sullivan." I said, "How come you're the Washington Post? How come you haven't hired him?" He goes, "We don't have enough money." And he said, why don't you hire him? I said, "We don't have enough money." So then this is a phone call between 2 people at 2 locations. And he said, "Well, how about if we do it together?" And I go, "Sure, that's a good plan." And I go, "Why don't I'll call the dean." And the dean then had just come on the job, and I called him up, and he was in the middle of some meeting or something. Of course, I know deans never meet. Just kidding. And I called him, and
Yeah, right.
and I said, look, and I told him the situation. There's a situation where we can hire a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist named John Sullivan, who could work with us at AU and be a professor, and could also work at the workshop, and could also work in, inside the Post. And so everybody could win. And that's exactly what happened. And John has been there, I don't know how many years now, John, 14 or 10, I forget.
9, little over 9 years.
Oh, 9. Okay, sorry. But it worked out beautifully for everybody. And it was very unusual. I mean, that's unusual to do, to have a newspaper, a major paper, call up and want to do something because they don't have enough money either, and combining. That was really interesting. We had a memorandum of understanding, and it worked out. It's worked out magnificently.
The investigative reporting workshop is a rare center in an academic setting. It both produces high quality journalism and it's training journalists at the same time. How do students do the real work and be students at the same time? Can you talk about that sort of conjoining of education and practical experience?
Sure. I mean, there have been close to 200 students now, interns, that have come through either as getting a break on their tuition, but working with us, and there's a credit thing that goes on there. Or anyway, there's these combinations where we've managed to all work together, where to have 200 students who have worked inside the workshop and either gotten hours through the university to do that in exchange as part of the tuition stuff, I guess, or they're actually paid, like particularly in the summer. It's worked out beautifully because all these young people, up to 200 or so of them, have learned how to do journalism inside the workshop, and no one mentors better than John and Lynn in particular. We all try to mentor them, but to have them come through that many and this many years, it's worked out magnificently for everybody, for the Post. But we've had 30 plus media outlets, including the Times, including Financial Times, all kinds of organizations that wanted to partner with us, and where we would sometimes cite their work and they would cite our work. And so it's really worked out really pretty well, I think, over time.
In a few minutes, we're going to sort of turn the tables and have the audience pose questions for us. I've got a couple more questions before we get to that. So if you all have questions, feel free to type some of them into the chat box. I can ask them while we're going along, but we will give you an opportunity to ask your own questions if you want to do that in just a few minutes. Let's sort of look ahead. IRW is entrenched within our school. It is a very valuable center, and you're doing great work. So what's going to happen going forward? What do you envision the future of IRW to be? Can you sort of look into your crystal ball and give us an idea?
That's hard to do, but I think. I think that philanthropic foundations that support our work continue to support our work and will continue to support our work, and that's obviously a good thing. And I think we're going to continue doing what we're doing for the next several years. One obvious key thing is always to have enough money to support the staff and all that, of course. And so far, we've been able to do that. What else we do from it? I mean, we've done a lot of interesting things. We've incubated 2 books that were, one was a national bestseller with Bartlett and Steele, the great two journalists at the Philadelphia Inquirer years ago. And I had a book that came out so we've done things with books, we've done things with documentaries, and we've had 200 students inculcated into how all these cool things work. And I think that's going to we hope, continue. And that'll continue to grow over time with each passing year. The whole idea of the workshop was to teach in addition to investigate and expose. So we wanted to make sure that it was set up in a proper way. So we had, I hate to use cliches like this, but the best and the brightest and they would learn how to do this work. And someday they would go to work in news organizations themselves. And that's exactly what's happened now. Scores of them now have come through the workshop and are working at commercial media all across the US, which is very exciting.
I'm going to date myself just a little bit, that when I came out of college, out of journalism school, in fact, the holy grail was to be an investigative reporter, because Fulwood and Bernstein were famous. And there was a whole category of would-be journalists who wanted to go into this profession because they wanted to be investigative reporters. In the age of Twitter and Instagram, do young people want to be investigative reporters? Are you training people to, to be able to investigate things in 140 characters, or how does that work? What is the new form of communication mean for investigative journalism?
Well, yeah, I teach international investigative reporting and in-depth journalism. Lynn and John teach a similar type courses. John at Inside the Post, is able to bring in the best and the brightest, whatever, if it's 10 or more people, but it's a group that are the preeminent folks. And so all of these editors at the workshop are inculcating these values and training the best and the brightest of these places. That's how we got 200 people that have come through, which is really exciting. I mean, it's special, I think. And most nonprofits, whether they're at a university or not, don't have something like that in the period of time we've done. And so we're really proud of it, and we continue to do it. And I'm hoping Frontline will come back so we can keep doing videos too, but that hopefully that'll occur in the next couple of years with any luck. Yeah.
Does the work that IRW do on the campus extend across the campus? Is your outreach into the community as well? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I wish we did more that way. There has been talk about it, and I've had meetings over the years, not lately, but a few years ago. I had folks at 2 or 3 other colleges within AU trying to get the best investigative minds, but not just at the School of Communication, but other schools. And I had folks at the law school and at the School of International Service and other places to begin to conceive how we could do larger investigations, more broad and both international and national. And we had a lot of great meetings. It never quite got off the ground, but it's still on the idea that only journalists can do investigative work and research is just BS. Sorry. There are brilliant professors who are very thoughtful and knowledgeable, and they also are every bit as familiar with public records and different types of public records that journalists all do. Journalists sometimes are smug and think they're the only ones that know everything, but academics are exceedingly bright about all these things. And so I talked a few years ago to a prior dean at SOC about this very thing. Why couldn't we take the best professors who are into investigative type subjects across all 6 or 7 schools and do it? And we talked a lot about it. We never quite could get it off the ground because everything else was going on, teaching and running stuff. But I still think that's a good idea. I just wish we had more hours in a day. This 24-hour thing is just not enough. No.
I'd like to switch gears now and invite our guests to join our conversation and pose questions. You can either unmute to ask a question or directly type it into the chat window. I'll see it there and I can ask it for you if you're too shy to speak up. So do we have anyone out in our cyber world have a question for Charles or want to comment on the whole situation with investigative journalism and education? I am sure someone is going to ask me a question.
I think Michael Connor has a question.
Okay, Michael?
Yes, Chuck, I was wondering, and Dean, if you have an opinion about this, do you think the nonprofit model is the future of journalism, or will there be some hybrid versions Or will for-profit entities persist for a long time? What's your sense of the direction the media landscape is taking?
Well, I'll throw in some. We have, we have a lot of journalists these days, as we know. There are 300. Let me figure this out for a second. We've had a large number of journalists that have left the profession, and how we do this and how we manage it is very, very tricky. There are 600 newspapers that went under, completely died as newspapers in recent years. The nonprofit sector, which I was involved in, I founded the third nonprofit in the country, the Center for Public Integrity. Now there are 300 nonprofit news organizations. That's actually kind of amazing. And so to me, that's progress. I don't know how good that is for the Park Foundation. You probably now have 300 organizations seeking funding. I'm sure you'll handle it just fine, but but anyway, so I think there is a lot of interest in all these things, and the fact that there's that level of interest and this many nonprofits and that the funding has been there to a large extent, which is really exciting. I hope all those things last, because honestly, we used to have 3 or 4 nonprofits in this country doing journalism, and now look where it is. It's actually blossomed and why did it blossom? Because we lost 600 newspapers, and philanthropic foundations and others put money in, because if the only way to keep watchdogging government and corporations and others is to be on top of it and to know how important it is. And so anyway, I'm an optimist. I think that's possible. And when you have 300 nonprofits now, somebody is funding all of them. And to me, that's amazing. That's a big number. To me, it is.
My old colleague, Bob Rosenblatt from the Los Angeles Times, has a question. He wanted a couple of questions. He wanted to know, with the collaborative relationship with the Post, who has the final say on stories? Can the Post spike a story, or can you spike a story, depending on what you find and how you do that? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I mean, the short answer is the Post will decide who to spike the story. I mean, they'll be the ones. They're the Bigfoot in the room. The workshop, we have, we've done 200 plus stories at the workshop. And Lynn probably knows better than anybody. She's the managing editor, about whether we've ever made a decision about killing a story. But for the most part, it's due diligence. We do a lot of work, and we know what's there or not there. If we don't have government records or corporate records or records to base things, I'm a guy who's into the records. If you don't have any records, you're going to have a hell of a time trying to write a story that has any respect, frankly. So this is a really interesting question. I think it's just something we could talk about for a week, I think.
Lynn or John, do you have a comment about the relationship between IRW and the Post?
Sure. So the way that it works at the Post is either I come up with a story idea, or the investigative team is working on a story idea. We have 6 or 7 students each semester that come in through the practicum. The practicum is a class that's taught 2 days a week in the Post newsroom. They work alongside me in the newsroom. They work alongside other investigative reporters. And so that's the basis of our partnership. Either I'm writing the story myself, it's my idea, or I'm partnering with another investigative reporter. It could be a story that another investigative reporter on the desk has, and our students are working on that project. And our students have worked on every single major investigative project at the Post since we got there in 2013, including the Pulitzer Prize winning series about fatal police shootings, which one of our students, Derek Hawkins, had a byline on and was later hired by the Post. I should mention that our students get hired by the Post routinely, and we've had a fellowship through SOC that's gotten about 9 students, all students of color, hired at the Post over the last 9 years. And we've had about 6 or 7 students hired directly out of the practicum. In fact, this week we had a student, Toby Raji, who came to us without any journalism experience, spent a year at the Post. And what we did at the Post this year is we tracked every single lawsuit filed to overturn the election results, built a database and wrote stories off it. And we also tracked every single Capitol rioter for the Washington Post. And so our students were updating that data every day. And you'll see, if you look up any story on the Capitol riots, it has an AU and student tagline. So that's the nature. I mean, so there really isn't much of a decision about spike or not. Is editorial control. It's getting published in the Post. And I work for the Post. I'm partly paid by the Post. And so the Post has the final say on products that we publish into the Post. So
Bob also asked about, do we tell students or interns working at the Post not to use social media to advocate their personal opinions and views at all? Charles or John, do you know anything about that?
Yeah, I'll jump in. They all sign an ethics policy, and we have strict guidelines on freelancing and social media so that they can't express their political views. They can't do it, or we don't use them anymore. We had a case of a freelancer a couple of years ago who did a couple of really good stories for us, but then went ballistic on Twitter about Steve King in Iowa. So that didn't work out either. We really want to maintain neutrality on social media. We promote our stories, we promote the Post and other partner stories, and we tout good journalism everywhere.
part of the learning, I'm sorry to interrupt, part of the learning process is to help students understand that, they need to maintain their objectivity. I know there's a big debate in journalism about what that exactly means, but we tell them that they should err on the side of caution, and that, I will, before I bring somebody into the Post, I will go back and review their social media history and try to determine if they've expressed views that would make me believe that they're not going to be objective, and that they're not going to be somebody who we can teach how to do this job in a way that's objective. Lens on here on Downey, who famously doesn't vote, and I didn't vote for many years either. When I was an investigative reporter at the Philadelphia Inquirer, and even early in the Post. So I do vote now, actually. So yeah, we're pretty careful about that. We try to teach them about that. It's part of learning how to be a journalist.
I wanted to add how important this larger development is in journalism over this last decade or so, for which Chuck Lewis was obviously a pioneer. There are many journalism schools now have relationships with the news media, or do projects that the news media pick up around the country, doing professional level work. There are also collaborations with nonprofits in particular, collaborations between nonprofits and for-profit news organizations. This is something that Chuck and I would remember a time maybe 20 years ago when such collaboration was zero. We were all competitors with each other. We all wanted to do our own great work and not to help anybody else out. And now this kind of collaboration, particularly in investigative reporting, which is so time consuming, is extremely important to the current state of journalism in the United States. I would just guess offhand that we probably have at least 10 times, if not much more than that, investigative reporting than we would have if there was not such collaboration throughout the country.
Thank you for that. I see that Judge Gerald Lee had a question. I'm going to let him ask the question. Judge Lee is a trustee at American University, so in effect, he's my boss, and I have to respect him. So, ask your question, Judge Lee.
I'm not your boss. Let me start with this. I've been away from communication for a long time, but I'm still very active in it as a lawyer and a judge. There are a lot of people nowadays who call themselves journalists and who have a blogs, and they're all on social media. When I was in school of communications, Ed Bliss, who worked for Walter Cronkite, taught us who, what, when, where, and how. And it wasn't about what you thought of the situation. And I really find it difficult sometimes in parsing the various commercial news media to find some just pure journalism. Let me figure out what I think about it. I don't really care what the journalist thinks, but I want to know what I think about it. What's your view about that, Charles?
Wow. I'm a sort of just the facts kind of guy, and I don't do a story unless I've looked at documents and you know, primary source material ideally, and then secondary source stuff as well, material as well, and then decide to what extent is it a story and should it run or not. But that's sort of, I mean, that I'm generally a cautious person. I think all journalists who are editors or are in these situations have people approaching them all the time for, will you do this story? Or how about, look what I've got for you. And, often you don't want to go anywhere near it. In many cases, you have to be, as everyone, you and others know, I mean, it's very tricky. So it's a vigilant thing. You have to be on top of it. And if you're not on top of it, you're going to have problems, significant problems. And that has happened in journalism, as we know, across America.
I was going
Thank you.
to add something to that. And part of the value of what we're doing at IRW and the Post is when I was a young journalist, I started out the Chicago Reporter, and Laura Washington was there to show me how to be an investigative reporter. And then I went to the News and Observer. Well, I went to Missouri first. And Pat Stith was there to teach me how to be an investigative reporter. And then I went to the Philadelphia Inquirer, and Bill Merrill was there to teach me how to be an investigative reporter. That kind of environment where you can learn next to somebody in a newsroom is diminishing. And it's diminishing because, the demands placed on the 24-hour news cycle, the constriction of the industry, the inability to hire and promote and have those kinds of positions available, and the time to learn. So what the Practicum and other programs, especially IRW and the Practicum, seek to do is give students that kind of mentorship where they can learn these kind of values and principles that we're talking about. They can figure out, what is the proper way to do this. And that's, I tell them all, because I learned it from Pat Stith, intellectual honesty is the number one most important quality of a journalist.
I don't see any hands up. Do we have another question from anyone? Oh, yes. Unmute. Yeah, there you go.
Okay. I have a question about what do you consider the future of broadcast journalism? Because right now, a lot of broadcast reporters, even the investigative reporters, are trying to deal with getting the story, Twitter, Facebook, all of this colliding. And it appears to be taking time away from the real product, the real news aspect.
I mentioned earlier, I worked at ABC News and CBS News 60 Minutes, and I saw some kind of grim things. I mean, in the late 80s, as you're probably very well aware, the commercial broadcast world kind of began to contract in a substantial way. I think a few hundred stations were gone from it. And so the extent of what they were able to do in the first place got worse. Well, anyone who watches the local news, weather and sports, but there's not a whole lot of actual news. And it's been a problem for years. It's not new, but it is a problem. And including the magazine shows, I was at 60, but I knew people at Dateline and I knew people at 2020. And I actually did something for 2020 once at ABC. That got increasingly schlocky. I mean, 60 Minutes is still probably the best, most respected program, but they are not perfect either, which I alluded to earlier. So it's delicate. I mean, when you have institutions, it all comes down to who's running it and what is the ethos about how they function. And, I quit 60 Minutes because the founder of 60 Minutes, Don Hewitt, wanted to take his best friend out of the script. And I quit the next day, walked out, broke a contract, didn't have any money, slightly nuts, but I'm glad I left. And so this is a problem. And it's a problem in the television world and the radio world and also the print world. I mean, it's not unique to one of those. It's a problem in general. I'll stop talking about it, but it's
Well, I guess part of my question is I think it's a problem too, but what can we do about it? How do we deal with this problem that is getting worse over the years and not getting better?
I mean, I haven't had a chance to go deep on this, but it seems like leadership is kind of an important issue, whether it's TV stations, radio stations, newspaper editors. There needs to be people that have backbone and integrity, frankly, and will stick to what is important and what should be done in a democracy. And that's not always the case by itself, is not always the case between the hundreds of newspapers and the TV show, the local TV folks in the country. And so just because it's a nice idea doesn't mean it's going to happen, but it comes down to management and integrity, frankly. I mean, it sounds corny, but it's kind of true. And if there's no accountability about what people are saying and doing, and the folks working wherever that is put up with it because they're afraid of getting fired or they don't have spine to say anything, that's when you get mediocrity. And I mean, it's not unique to journalism necessarily, but it is part of there's a problem with that in journalism occasionally, for sure.
I have while I totally agree with what Chuck is saying, I have a slightly different take in terms of what the solution is. And it's one of the reasons that I'm extremely excited about the job I have, is that for all of its warts and all of the problems that we have in the media is a lagging indicator of society, not a leading indicator. And so much of the public turns into the schlocky television that you see. And I think that there is a dire need for media literacy and civic awareness to understand both how our government works, how our society works, how our economy works, and in ways that go beyond being entertained through social media outlets and other forms of alternative media. In the older days, and I hate saying that because it makes me sound like a dinosaur, but there was sort of a universal understanding of how the society worked. Now, I don't believe that there was this golden period where media was any better, but I think the public was better in terms of what it expected of its media. And if you are racing to the bottom, you're going to get the kind of abuses that Chuck's talked about. We have an opportunity, I think, in journalism education to inform young people and hope that they'll carry that awareness with them throughout their careers, that there'll be much more questioning, much more inquiring about the media that they consume, and that they won't just be motivated by instant gratification of clicks. And so that's a real challenge, I think, for us in media education, to be able to impart some of the values so that they will demand better of the media that they are consuming. Yes.
Can I just throw in something to add? One of the great things about IRW, and I'm the journalism division director, this is to answer your question about the broadcast, is that IRW works so hand in hand with the journalism division. For example, we have a professor, Chris Halsney, who is an Emmy award-winning journalist from Denver, long investigative history. And so we are trying and working now for the last 2 or 3 years, working with IRW and this professor to bring investigative broadcast journalism to the forefront. And it's something that it's interesting as we work it out with students. We also are working on podcasting. So I think because IRW is so welcoming to trying all these ideas, and it's unusual as a center because we all work together, that it's been great to have the opportunity that some of the students who are in the program can work with John Sullivan at the Washington Post, professors can work with Chuck and Lynn and John at IRW on all kinds of investigative projects. regardless of what the platform is. I think the short answer, the longer, I guess, answer to what you were talking about, where's it all going to go? Who knows? We can only keep trying all of these things and staying abreast of what's happening. But it is changing before our eyes. The best thing I can say about that is our students. I mean, just picture them, the students at IRW, they just took a whole year online. They did work with the workshop online. They did work at the Washington Post online. And so if we have to pivot, we pivot.
I think there's a question from Tyrone who is on his iPhone. You want to ask your question, Tyrone?
Yes, Dean, can you hear me?
Yes, we do.
Welcome aboard.
Thank you so much.
My question has to do with what appears to be a revisiting of the Nixon enemies list. I heard in the media recently that some reporters were targeted by the Trump administration, and it only came to light when records were, I believe, released through some social media platform. That feels very chilling to me and consistent with an attack on our democracy. I wonder if there are any views on how we might protect journalists from these kinds of transgressions.
Any ideas on that, Chuck?
That's a hard question. You know, I think that's why we have editors, and it's why we have managers, and is the more people that are watching a situation, including the editorial elements of a story, for example, the more eyeballs and gray matter that are brought to those subjects, the better the chance of it being solid in terms of story and in terms of facts and all that kind of stuff. So I think that the only way to do that is to have accountability, have folks who are watching the story, so to speak, or watching the subject. And it doesn't always happen, admittedly, but it should.
Patrick, you have a hand up? Yes.
Thank you, Dean, and welcome again. I found something encouraging just in the last couple of weeks, that the Department of Justice has revised its policy about subpoenaing journalists for the information on their sources. I mean, this is something that we tried to do. Len Downey and I worked on this for years at the Washington Post, trying to promote the Free Flow of Information Act to protect the confidentiality of journalist sources, and thereby to enhance the investigative journalism role that we've been talking about here. And I found it encouraging. The Obama administration didn't do this. The Trump administration certainly went the other way. And I decided I'd be hopeful about the current government's response to investigative journalism and the value of it and the need for it, and the need for the government to stay out of our business. And if they want to investigate leaks, they investigate those who are leaking, not those who are leaked to. So I think we're, at least for the last couple of weeks, on a better path than we've been on for a while.
I would agree with that, Pat. I've been doing I'm doing some research on this for a report I'm going to do for the Committee to Protect Journalists on the first year of the Biden administration in the press. And it's very encouraging so far. Well, first of all, it was discouraging to discover that these subpoenas had been issued secretly during the last administration, and that gag orders had been sought and issued by judges on lawyers for two of those news organizations to prevent them from even knowing this was going on and to be able to fight it in what appears to be violations of the guidelines for the Justice Department that were worked out by a number of us, including myself, during the Obama administration with the then Attorney General Holder. And so the fact that the current Attorney General was so quick to meet with the news organizations at their request and their lawyers, and has promised to do something about this, to reinforce the guidelines, to expand the guidelines is very encouraging. Now we have to see what it actually is and whether or not it's something that would survive a different administration in the future or only be applicable to this one.
I think we've got time for one more question. Is there one more question you want to pose to Chuck Lewis? Do we, no, not another? Well, I want to thank you, Chuck, for taking this time. I thank all of you all for coming out and sharing your insights about the work of the Investigative Reporting Workshop, which adds so much to the School of Communication. And I want to thank our guests in particular for joining us this evening. We value your support and your commitment to such award-winning, high-quality journalism. And as members of our community, you play a critical role in helping us realize our aspirations. So thank you so much for joining us this evening. If you would like more information about the Investigative Reporting Workshop, Chuck and the IRW team encourage you to reach out. Their email addresses are available on your screen now and are listed on the IRW website. As the new Dean of the School of Communication, I'm so very proud to share the work of Chuck Lewis and the Investigative Reporting Workshop with you. IRW's work is a unique and powerful example of the way this community tells stories that inspire action and influence change. Change making is in the university's DNA. I encourage you to stay involved with us. I hope I can count on your partnership and your support to continue this important work as we try to extend our impact. Thank you all so much for being with us this evening.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.